Up, the Brooklyn Nets took on the Toronto Raptors on the road, but someone forgot to tell the coaching staff and the players Jacque Vaughn doesn't live here anymore. 28-point loss on the road. We break it down coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions, they do apply. And terms and conditions should have applied to the interim head coach making his debut, Kevin Ollie, the Brooklyn Nets. They all rallied around one another and said, don't you worry, boys. We're going to get this thing back on track. 28-point loss to the, once upon a time, 19-win Toronto Raptors, Doug. What a mess.
Oh, buddy, the more things change, the more they stay the same in Brooklyn Nets world. Come out of the...
You got to love consistency.
Go into the All-Star break, lose by 50 to the Celtics. Over the All-Star break, fire Jacque Vaughn, fresh start with Kevin Ollie, and then they lose by 29 to the Raptors in the first game back. And that is just how you can basically sum up the issues here in Brooklyn. It's one game. Obviously, you're not going to judge Kevin Ollie's coaching performance after just 48 minutes of basketball. Though if you were looking for a tone change around getting back on defense or being the hunted instead of being the hunters instead of the hunted, and the all the superlatives that come along with playing really hard, and that's who's going to play. I mean, we saw none of it. So it's a little frustrating because you're hoping that you're going to come out first game with a new coach, looking for performance, looking to kind of step things up, knowing that maybe not all minutes are going to be safe. And it looked like effortless, inspirationless basketball for another 48 minutes, completely literally run out of the gym by the Raptors in terms of fast break points. And we'll get into some of the confusing decisions they made in this new look Nets. But like I said at the beginning, the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same when it comes to this team.
Really got to look into those 17 EGPs. I mean, I don't know how many we're going to say got checked off tonight, but we don't have a definitive list. So we really got to get into the weeds here a little bit. You mentioned it, man. I mean, listen, I'm going to bring a lot of humor to this discussion because it feels like you got it. It's how you avoid kind of crying over what felt like was supposed to be a turning of a page here. And you mentioned the key thing there, effort, energy, hustle, just that baseline thing that you assumed from some of the ways that a lot of the players were talking at the back end of Jacque Vaughn's tenure and wanting to see something different. Things have to change. They came out just as lifeless as they have over the past several weeks. Like, that to me is easily the most alarming thing. And while I won't make this one game reflective of Kevin Ollie as a coach, what I will say is it feels reflective of this team for the next 27 games. Like, maybe that was it. Like, we're good. We're going to go ahead and check out on this thing. I know I'm being way too overreactionary to this, but it's a 20-win Toronto Raptor team, who, oh, by the way, is only one game behind you now in the win column, which is constantly the reminder here about where this team is and where this roster is right now.
Well, the hope that you were going to see here was, like, I think when we going into this game, us as fans, doing the podcast and analysts and whatever you want to call it, we were hoping to see a couple things, right? We were hoping to see a step up in terms of just overall effort and energy, right? That has been lacking at times. Again, they just came off a 50-point loss that effectively got Jacque Vaughn fired. It was other things, but that was like the straw that broke this camel's back, right? Like, they probably didn't want to fire Vaughn, but when it's so bad and there's like sort of dissension in the locker room and there's a listlessness around maybe just what the overall plan is as a team, and then you get just brutalized by 50 points in the All-Star break, the timing kind of just is what the timing is, and you move on. So going into this game, the hope here was, okay, let's see a little more effort. Let's see maybe a little more creativity in the offensive end. I get it's only been a couple days, so you're not going to make wholesale changes. Let's maybe see some different combinations. We'll talk about that in terms of rotations. And what we got was, literally the same exact thing. Like, right down to confusing pairings on the court, combinations that don't seem to make a lot of sense, getting completely crushed in transition and fast break. I mean, the very definition of like a team that's hustling, when you get crushed in fast break, in terms of the opponent fast breaks, that's the first thing you can point to, be like, hey, are we getting back on defense? Well,
Right.
no. And then, I mean, really at every single level, it was just a confusing, head scratching, low energy, frustrating. I mean, whatever pejorative words you want to put in here to describe the game, I mean, that's literally what it was. And it's just another blow. We get into the bench of garbage time. And there's just not, I honestly, my hope here was to go in and say, like, hey, if they don't win the game, let's pull on a couple threads that we can see that there was like active changes. No, nothing. All the same. And so that, as a fan, just can be really a frustrating thing, because the hope around a coaching change and a coaching, sort of like, well, just change, I don't even know the word, is that there's going to bring new life or some other thing to the table. And it just didn't happen at all.
Yeah, and one thing that we probably won't get into too much here, and we'll save for an off day, that I will just add at the top of the show before we move into rotations and other things that bothered us tonight, is that you also got rumblings reported by Michael Scotto of Clutch Points that there was some level of issue around Jacque Vaughn and his dependency on Ben Simmons as being the centric focal point of the offense, specifically attached to Spencer Dinwiddie, maybe even to Mikal Bridges. So then when you come into this as well, I will say it just put an extra little layer of, oh, what is this going to look like for the last 28 games here? Because now you have the potential of, not only is this head coach with primarily the same roster going to try to change and reestablish what the hierarchy is and the pecking orders on this team, but then you also maybe do have just players that don't necessarily feel like they all fit together from a pure basketball standpoint. So you're going to go out there and you're going to see similar combinations, and you're going to keep running up against the same issues. I'll say this as well, because you reiterate this time and time again on the podcast over the last several months, frankly, since the start of the season, maybe, that Jacque Vaughn, you fire the coach, but this team and this roster has issues. Like, they're a collection of pretty good individual players that don't necessarily all mesh well together to create cohesive units. And this tonight, I think, was the first foot into the waters of, right, this roster just has problems. And even if you could have done a lot of things better tonight, it doesn't change the high level perspective on where this team currently stands and the issues they're going to face going forward.
Yeah, that's basically all it is. That sums it up perfectly. Is that this is the reason I thought Jacque Vaughn, to some degree, would stay around as coach, right? Is that like,
why get rid of the guy that when the groceries are rotten? They always use that cliche, right? The groceries are kind of a hodgepodge. They don't make a great meal together. So why change the cook? It doesn't change what the ingredients currently are.
But as we'll talk about here, like in a second, and we'll get into this in a second, I do think there are things they can do. I think we both think there are things they can do here that can look different, that they seem hesitant or reluctant or unwilling to try. And so, yes, no, like I know you're about to tee it up, but like, yes, this is a flawed roster, but it's not flawed to the point where there aren't some combinations that would seem, and by the way, have worked, have worked in the past, that they just don't seem to want to try. And so we'll talk about a few of those things in a second, because we saw them creep up tonight, but it's not like there's no hope here. There are basketball players here. It's not a perfect roster. It's not a championship roster. It's barely a playoff roster, but it's not a lose by 70 or 80 combined points over the last 2 games roster. Like that, that's not that, right? And so this is not like the ultimate tankathon here. Like they shouldn't be getting crushed like this. And I do think there are some changes they can make that would make it at least more watchable.
This is not a 121-93 loss on the road to Toronto Raptors style roster. And coming up here in a second, we'll highlight, why was Kevin Ollie still choosing to play Ben Simmons with Nicholas Claxton or Day'Ron Sharpe? Somewhat stubbornly so, it appeared. We'll get into that and other rotation notes in just 1 second.
All right, going to make myself feel better here by telling you about our friends over at Stitch Fix. You know, that instant confident boost you get from putting on an outfit that just makes you look really good. That's what you get, and I've gotten with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, your budget. They do all the shopping for you. This is absolutely music to my ears. Don't have to go into the store. I just go through the Stitch Fix website. I go through the different styles. They pick things out for me. They send it in the mail. I'm wearing it, one of them right now. This literally just came today. Flag and Anthem, the hoodie. They know that your boy loves to wear the hoodies. This thing is going to be probably not coming off for the better part of the winter. And I know I'm going to get re-upped here in another week with just another box of things that I can put on. I got the jeans on too. Not going to stand up and show you those bad boys, but these came right out of the box, fit perfectly, knew exactly what I needed. Stitch Fix has you covered for all of your style needs. You're just going to get the things that fit you right, that make you feel good, that make you look good at the same time. It's so easy. Forget about going into the stores to shop. You got to go into Stitch Fix. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/locked on. That's stitchfix.com/locked on. Stitchfix.com/locked on.
All right, so as we continue the post-game episode, Brooklyn Nets 121-93 falling to the Toronto Raptors on the road, getting absolutely dumpstered in the fourth quarter, by the way. We remind you, head on over to WeGotNets.com and pick up your free ebook when you sign up with your email. 5 stories in 5 days, all about the big moments throughout the Brooklyn Nets and New Jersey Nets history. Buddy, I could tell 5 stories from the last 2 games for the Brooklyn Nets. You get over there. We also have a forum. You can send us a message, ask us a question, voice your complaints about what's going on with Brooklyn right now. WeGotNets.com. Sign up for that free ebook today. Okay, so let's talk about the Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe of it all, because it clearly has not worked. But even more than that, there are plenty of sample sizes that do work when it comes to Ben Simmons. Tee up the conversation around what they should have been doing more of, especially when you think about turning over a new leaf with Kevin Ollie at the helm.
Okay, so one thing with Simmons is, like, we've seen it pretty clearly. The Simmons plus Claxton thing doesn't work, right? Like, there's not enough spacing. They don't really kind of know what they're doing on offense. There's too many sort of like weak side stuff with him where he's just standing corner. There's no one, you never need to guard him, weak side, strong side, really at all. Like, and when Claxton's around, it's not like he can kind of get into the dunker spot and initiate actions or just run a lot of like even dribble handoff actions because you can just sag off him so much because you know you're not going to get hit from outside. I think they have to come to some kind of realization here that those combinations don't work. But here's the thing, other combinations do, right? So, like, yes, it's not look good for Simmons in the half court, but part of that is that they don't put enough spacing around him. The one way that you can unlock his biggest skill set is to put spacers around him. It's shown time and time again that he is excellent at this. They cannot make that work when they're playing with Nicholas Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe. Every single moment tonight, he was paired with one of these bigs. It makes no sense. And they have some of the other personnel to be able to do this. A lot. Let's say this, a lineup of Simmons plus Cam Thomas plus Mikal Bridges plus Cam Johnson plus Dorian Finney-Smith. Yeah, there's no true center on there. You're going to have some rim protection problems. You do have something like enough length. You can probably get away with it. I'm not saying start this lineup, but at least try the lineup. Try things like this with at least 4 other spacers around Simmons. Simmons this season in 231 minutes without Claxton and Sharpe on the court. The Nets are a +6 net rating, 121 offensive, 114 defensive. 231 minutes is not nothing. Like, and that this is basically the same team. Yeah, there's no Dinwiddie. Yeah, there's no Royce O'Neal. You have some other big spacers on the team, like Cam Johnson, like DFS, like Bridges. Honestly, he's not huge, but like you have guys that can play with them. Try these lineups. I mean, the pair, I'll get into the guard stuff here in a second on the other side of it, but just, I don't understand. Like, there's a long track record of Simmons being able to be a positive player with these kinds of guys around them. I mean, and every single time tonight, you check in and Claxton's there, check in, Sharpe's there. What do you expect to happen? They can't space. It's like, I don't know, man. It's mind-boggling to me. I get it started for 5 minutes because you kind of feel like you need to start both the players because they're 2 of your 5 best players. After that, maybe Day'Ron Sharpe needs to sit. Like, maybe they need to do other things. But here's what I can't keep running these non-spacing lineups out. It makes no sense.
And that's what I wanted to get into here, because let's save the guards in the backcourt conversation for the third segment of this episode. There's plenty of things that really bothered us, but I think what dovetails off of this nicely is that part of it, right? So the reality is, and you know it, and everybody knows this, is that, okay, you don't want to play Ben Simmons with Nicholas Claxton or Day'Ron Sharpe. Then where are these guys playing? Because I tell you what, you're not going to turn around and do is put Nicholas Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe out on the court in a large ball second unit lineup, right? You're not going to break those guys up and then say, well, we'll have a lot of rebounding and nobody to shoot, and no one to go at the basket and all those other other issues that you run into. Now,
real
still
quick,
yeah.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. Simmons played only 21 minutes. It's not like he plays 40 minutes and you can't get away from this. Like,
and so
he played 21 minutes.
This is the both end of it, because so on the one hand, like you just mentioned, it's like, okay, then if it comes down to Daron Sharp, you don't get to play because we can't afford. The issue that gets created is the point that I'm making is you don't have nobody in this front court, and Ben Simmons counts as a front court guy. Nobody can shoot. Nobody can do anything other than either rebound individually or be a ball handler, be a facilitator like Simmons is. But to your point, when he's coming back of injury and he's only playing 20-something minutes, then you can break them up. Because effectively, if you look at Daron Sharp and Ben Simmons, who combined for 37 minutes in this game, we'll go ahead and treat those as one player, right? Those are one player. They share their minutes overlapping, or him and Claxton, vice versa. These three players effectively occupy two bodies on the court at any given time. And then you spread them out accordingly. Why I say let's save the guard conversation is because you get into garbage time in this game, and it's the first one I understand that. I'm not even really listening. Trendon Watford has had some little minutes here and there, never been anything substantial or consistent. But we've had this conversation about Jalen Wilson going back, and I thought we didn't get into this after the Jock Vaughn firing and before this game tonight. I thought one of the biggest benefactors was going to be Jalen Wilson. He's already shown that he can be a rotation player. He's already shown he has a nose for the ball. It looks like the kind of guy that Kevin Ollie talked about in his introductory press conference comments. Like, I want guys that want to hustle, do the dirty plays, the grind stuff. He can shoot from the outside. He's one of the bigger players that you can work into this rotation and effectively take out. You use Dorian Finney-Smith in combination with Nicholas Claxton after you take Ben Simmons out. And if you're going to bring in Daron, well, then go ahead and bring in a Jalen Wilson who has some size and perimeter shooting and floor spacing. It seemed like tonight, again, first game, you talk about repeating old bad habits, which is playing Simmons and Claxton and Daron Sharp together in any combination, and then also seeming to be committed to things that have not worked for you either, which does bleed into the smallness of these lineups. Jalen Wilson deserves minutes. I was shocked. I know it's the first game, but I was just shocked that he did not see the court in a game like this against the Toronto Raptors team that has a lot of length at a lot of positions.
He shot 69% from three over his last 5 games and couldn't get onto the court garbage time.
Yeah.
And here's the thing with Simmons, and so you're right. So you add in Jalen Wilson as like another floor spacer, sort of like decently bigger body that can kind of be out there to muck up the works a little bit. I know the pushback, and I got some of this from like people that cover the Nets. I don't want to say who it is because I like these guys, but it was like, oh, well, the defense is going to suffer if you only play Simmons. Hey, I hate to break this to you. Spoiler alert. They just let the Raptors hang 121 points on them. The defense already stinks. Yeah. So like if you're worried about the defense, they couldn't stop anybody tonight. So at that point, if you're already having problems with this, and the defense hasn't been like horrible, but and it should be better theoretically with Claxton and Simmons. And they, the beginning of the third quarter, they came out and looked pretty lively. And there are times for it, but it's not like this is like this isn't the 85 Bears, right? Like with their defense, it's like, yeah, they're going to give up some points, but maybe they can run and gun and jack threes and really get up and down the court. And yeah, they're going to give some up on the defense, but it's not like they're not doing that anyway. So I can't hear the part where you're going to give it up on defensively. They're not shutting people down anyway. So at that point, just try combinations that seem like they're going to work.
And I will say that it does seem like that's one of the things we talked about this with Ben Simmons, that the defensive end of the floor is just not the same as it once was for him, whether that's still ramping up, et cetera, or he's just a step slower and he's gotten a little bit older, all those things, right? And I do think that factors into it. In all of this conversation about who he should or shouldn't play with, it is also like, again, it's only 21 minutes, by the way, which then bleeds into the question of like, what are the other combinations and rotations that you're working? How are you finding success? That's 21 minutes out of 240. So you had a lot of other minutes on the floor without Ben Simmons that you needed to find ways to be successful, and the Brooklyn Nets were unable to do that as well. So we'll talk about the backcourt concerns. We'll talk about even all the way up to the 3 spot and some questionable combinations that Kevin Ollie put out there tonight. But before we do that, though, our friends over at eBay Motors have been doing us a solid, teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd, you know this guy, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. Whether you're prepping for that daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we got you covered to provide players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Dougster, who does Josh got lined up this week?
Yeah, a bunch of good ones as we come out of the All-Star break. Different teams dealing with a bunch of different injury, just up on the injury front. I got Ayo Dosunmu. He's fully locked into the starting gig right now with the Bulls. Patrick Williams is out, and they lost Torrey Craig for a bit over the All-Star break as well. So Io's minutes are really locked in. And if you've been watching the Bulls at all, you know that they've been really pretty generous with the starters' minutes. I mean, these guys can push 40 minutes with the best of them. So you want to take a look at Io DeSumo. Keontae George, it feels like he's locked into the starting gig right now at the 2-guard spot for the Jazz. They are still bringing Jordan Clarkson off the bench, but they're running these 3-guard units, and Keontae George at the starting point guard. He's getting a lot more minutes. He's going to get shots. He put up over 20 shots before the All-Star break. You're going to want to take a look at him. Marvin Bagley third. Sorry, I was about to insult him by saying Marvin Bagley Jr. Marvin Bagley the third got the starting gig at center now that Daniel Gafford is out in Washington. They made another move too, putting Bilal Coulibaly in the starting lineup here instead of Jordan Poole. So a bunch of stuff happening with some fantasy value over there in Washington. Don't forget Trey Mann too, been in the starting lineup for the Hornets with LaMelo Ball still out. He's been really been able to crush it across the box score, putting up fantasy points just about every single category with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You can make sure your ride stays running smoothly with eBay Motors brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs. eBay Motors has it. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, the price is your burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, so as we wrap up the Locked On Nets podcast post-game episode, thank you as always for making us your first listen of the day. Get us over on YouTube as well, so where you're watching the post-game. And we also have bonus content coming out on all the different platforms. We got Nets.com included in that as well. Now, here's the thing for me. We'll get into this backcourt situation. The one thing that didn't change, and this is something that I found funny. So Cam Thomas comes out, plays 30 minutes, 8 of 16, struggled from deep, 2 of 7, right? Didn't really get to the line much at all. He seems really frustrated, 19 points in terms of maybe not starting to get more calls, feeling like he deserves a little bit more of the respect of the referees. I didn't suspect that he was going to be anything different. And some of the fans seem to feel like, and we heard this, gave him a big hug, Kevin Ollie, after the first practice. But he was already playing 30 plus minutes under Jacque Vaughn. Like, the idea that this was going to unleash some new level of a player that fans were irritated by Jacque Vaughn early in the season, he's already doing that. So that wasn't one of the changes here. One of the things
that was sorry to interrupt you, but wasn't that so confusing? I mean, like, he was averaging 34 minutes and 19 shots a game over his last weeks and weeks of basketball. Like, I was confused by what they thought was going to get more of. He was taking all the shots, not in a bad way, but he was just already doing it. So I found that so confusing about what now we're going to unleash this guy. He takes all the shots anyway.
No, that's the residual memory of him not playing last year and not playing sooner. And you want to just dump this thing onto Jacque Vaughn as he heads out the door. Totally fine. He was too short-sighted to make that move early in the season, but he's already been doing it. And just to round that out, as we've seen as well of late, the only two players that were really successful tonight for the Brooklyn Nets were Cam Thomas, Mikal Bridges, 35 minutes, 7 of 16, 4 of 10 from deep, got to the line a handful of times. They combined for 40 points. Like, that's been their offense. There hasn't been a lot of other contributors. And certainly on a night when you have Cam Johnson coming off the bench for 21 minutes and only giving you 1 of 7 and 0 of 6 from deep, that's not going to help you either. But that's not why we're here, Doug. We're here to talk about the sweet, sweet beauty of finding the shortest possible players on this roster and getting them on the court together at the same time.
Yeah, look, I was joking about this, but when you have a lineup of a 6'1" guy, a 6'3" guy, and a 6'3" guy on the court at the same time, at point guard, shooting guard, and small forward, like, 2 of those dudes better be Hall of Famers, because otherwise, I don't know what you think is going to happen here on defense. And this is what they consistently ran.
You're going to lose by 28 points.
Dennis Schroeder plus Dennis Smith Jr. plus Lonnie Walker. Dennis Schroeder plus Dennis Smith Jr. plus Cam Thomas. They got crushed on defense. It's obvious. I don't know what you think is going to happen. And all of a sudden, this is just what happens. And they continually kept on doing it the entire time. And so if you're going to make case, and not like anyone's making this case, but if you're going to make the case that defense is going to suffer if you just play Simmons at the 5 or something like that. Well, the defense is going to equally suffer when you play 3 really small guards at the same time, and then a 4, and then a regular center. And that's just what happened, like against a Toronto team that trends bigger anyway. And so I get that they have roster constrictions here because eventually you just run into problems. Like you're going to run into combinations that just don't really work. I get it. But I mean, they just might mean some of these guys just can't play, right? Like you might just need to see fewer minutes from some of these guys. And it's a hard problem to have. And it's an unenviable situation. But in general, we just can't see these like really small 3-guard lineups. And maybe just one of these guys can't play. And I don't know if it's a minutes issue with DFS and Cam Johnson, and they just haven't ramped up the full minutes yet because, we only saw, let me think, I think it was only 15. Yeah, 15 minutes from Dorian Finney-Smith and another 21 from Cam Johnson. And maybe you just run out. But this is what makes the non-Jalen Wilson thing even more confusing too.
Yep. I know I said it once, but I'm just going to, and even Trendon Watford to that extent, but the Jalen Wilson one is just confounding to me because you look at it and you see these type of versions when you see that lack of size across those three positions and go, just insert him, just put him into the lineup here. And guess what? Cam Johnson came off the bench again, coming back from the injury. We don't know if that's like entirely permanent or if it's a product of that. You mentioned only 15 minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith. That seems concerning as well, but you can feel free to go ahead. If you're going to trot out the Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton starting lineup, well, then stick Dennis Smith Jr. in the starting lineup, just so you take one of the small bodies out of the second unit. Then use Jalen Wilson there, or just do any combination that balances out the size. Because as we said before, too, like when we talk about the size on this team, well, we know Nicholas Claxton is slight of frame. He struggles with bigger matchups. We know that Day'Ron Sharpe isn't the perfect center. And we know that, by the way, even Ben Simmons, you say not playing him at the pure 5, right? He's not always going to play that spot. And if you do, like, he has not shown at any point this season that he is going to hunker down in the paint and body up against a big and prevent them from getting at the basket. That's not a part of his defensive game, at least at this current state. So at some point, you just need to think about this team one of two ways. And I wonder if you agree with this. Either balance the roster from a size and skill set perspective, because you have duplicates of a lot of things. Okay, fine. And mitigate these issues where you're super tiny, and mitigate these issues, as you said at the top, where you're playing two non-shooters, or shorten the heck out of this rotation. I get that you feel like we can go 10 deep and, there's so many talented guys, Lonnie Walker and everybody else. Maybe it just doesn't work. Who are our best 7 guys that complement each other the best, and we're going to run them like certain teams do, like the Knicks do with their best players, like Chicago you mentioned, right, with their players. They'll run them 35, 40 minutes. Then that's it. Then that's the version of this team, because every time they try to expand the rotation, it always gets muddled, and it seems to be fraught with missteps about who should play on a given night and which matchups make sense for them, seemingly that are obvious, at least from the outside looking in.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, this is tough. You're dealing with some guys that are kind of, sort of veteran guys. You're dealing with slightly bigger contracts, guys that are going to feel like they should play. I get that it's a hard spot, and guys who have been like pretty good for you at times this year, like Lonnie Walker and Dennis Smith Jr. And right. But at some point, I just don't know. It's like one of the only ways to do this is to just reduce some of these guys' minutes, unfortunately, because they just can't play with the other guy. And that's a hard spot. And I don't love saying that because we've rooted for these guys, and it's almost like one of the problems of being healthy. They bailed themselves out at times this season by not being healthy all the time. And that's led to sort of like easier, it's not been good for the team, but it's led to easier decisions, right? They've had easier decisions across this roster because Simmons missed a lot of time, or Cam Johnson was out, or Dorian Finney-Smith. Well, now they're all back, and they just kind of seem to not know which combinations work best or work at all. And part of that might mean one of these guys doesn't play a lot, right?
Because by the way, Day'Ron Sharpe's injury also helped them with this little Claxton and Simmons and everything else.
By the way, it doesn't help them as a team, but it helps with the decisions like that. You want all the guys to be healthy, but the problem is when they are all healthy, they still do not have a hierarchy of talent on this team. They don't know what the hierarchy is. They don't know what the combinations they want to run. They haven't tried them enough. And now it feels like they're trying all the wrong ones now that they're all back, because they probably don't want to upset somebody, or some guys think they should be playing. And all guys have kind of like on an individual level have mostly deserved to play. And that's the other problem. It's like, because if you say bench one of these guys, it's hard to actually make a basketball case for it on the player level, because a lot of the guys have played pretty well, but you can't make a case for it on a team level when you see that it's like Dennis, like I go back to Dennis Schroeder plus Dennis Smith Jr. plus Cam Thomas. 6'1", 6'3", 6'3". It's over. It's over. Like they're not going to be able to, and it's going to hurt all of them like across the board. This is a hard spot.
And ultimately, my last two thoughts here. Ultimately, if you said, hey, tonight, Dennis Smith Jr., you're not going to play tonight because we just don't want to get caught in that, right? And then maybe you're down though, and you need a defensive guy in the backcourt, and you look at the bench and he's there, right, holding true to the idea of we're going to try to break up some of these night overnight minutes to try to create better lineups. The last note that I'll make here is mentioned about Schroeder. Listen, I hate to break it to everybody here, but there may be an issue just about coming in at any spot where it was once occupied by Spencer Dinwiddie, because after what was an electric debut for Schroeder for the Brooklyn Nets, he's gone 6 of 25 from the field. So all of a sudden, 23 minutes tonight, another bad shooting night for him. He's a veteran. He gives you some good things. He gives you some bad. And ultimately, if you're going to start looking at him as occupying minutes, it actually introduced a new problem. Because remember, we said this about when they wanted to trade for DeJounte Murray. Good, let's get thinner. And guess what? When they got rid of Spencer Dinwiddie and they got back Schroeder, they got thinner. They got lighter. They got slighter inside of that backcourt combination space. And you see that getting exposed now, even to another degree, whatever Spencer Dinwiddie was not. So they got rid of a problem that they felt like they had on their roster in Spencer Dinwiddie, but now they introduce a functional issue potentially for how they make all these combinations work.
And, it's funny about Dinwiddie, there was plenty that didn't go right here. He did take a lot of the hardest defensive assignments on a lot of nights. Like he was guarding like Lauri Markkanen and KD. Like they put him in those assignments, and not like that's the best spot to be in. Like you probably don't want to do that, but he was taking those and, not really doing much on offense, but he was, I don't know, those were his primary assignments. And like, they're probably missing, I hate to say, they're probably missing that a little bit as well, because they don't really have like a defensive lockdown guy either. Not like he was either, but he did take those guys. Like they did put him into those situations. So anyway, a lot of problems here. We'll see how they kind of clear up here over the weekend. We're hoping to see some different combinations, but yeah, one game into the Kevin Ollie era of coaching, like we said at the top, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. We'll stick around for a few minutes here in YouTube live. Much appreciated everyone that jumped in following a rough loss. Make sure you go to WeGotNets.com and grab a copy of that free ebook. Make yourself feel better. Read some stories about the Brooklyn Nets. WeGotNets.com.
Time is a figure 8. At its center, the city of deja vu. Why, that's Robert Barreau.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back next week with more Brooklyn Nets basketball, and in a second on YouTube with more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Hey, that was a bad loss. Basketball. Yeah. Oh, when the podcast ends, the podcast begins. Talking to you guys, the Brooklyn Nets faithful, chopping it up with you after what was a miserable loss, as Doug mentioned here. Hey, here's a couple of fun facts. Throw up the at Locked On Nets. Got a good note about some things happening organizationally at the Joe Tsai level that we'll just touch on for the fun of it. Also worth mentioning, Spencer Dinwiddie in 2 games with the LA Lakers. Listen, he's giving you 7 assists, 4 assists. He's played 31 and 28 minutes. And I gave you a 4-6 the last time out there on the floor, 2 of 4 from deep. Listen, sometimes the change of scenery is good enough for everybody. And when I talked to the Kamenetsky brothers, they were over the moon about how I said his negative defense could still actually be a little bit of a positive. As you mentioned, taking on all those larger matchups for Brooklyn, getting him in a better role in LA could do him some good. I will, unless you got something you want to jump in with, Doug, just hit this one real quick from John, frequent flyer. Mentioned about the Koch family wanting to get a stake in Brooklyn. Does this signify Tsai's relinquishing some level of control to handle the operations, or is this selling later on? I don't, as more details come out, we'll get into it. All I know is the Koch family has a ton of money, even more money than Joe Tsai. And we saw Mark Cuban do this with the Mavericks. He relinquished nothing other than selling off a little chunk of the team and making a ton of money in the process, which is, I'm assuming, is what Joe
no, Cuban relinquished majority control, and
he still runs all the operations, though.
Yeah, but we'll see for how long. We'll see for how long when you don't own the team.
Yeah.
I get that he's kind of the mascot, but when rich guys tend not to love listening to other rich guys tell them what to do.
Yeah. So yeah, but that was his process. Sold off majority. You're correct. Good correction. He's still running the day to day, and who knows how long that lasts. But yeah,
David Koch. I mean, they said he's negotiating for up to a 15% stake in the team. I remember, Tsai was a minority owner before he was a majority owner too, right? Like sometimes there's a passing of the baton this way. Who knows? I mean, this hasn't even happened. It was also reported by Nets Daily that they were asking for a discount on the price. The valuations of these things get all over the place. And so we'll see. But I mean, I guess you can call it a somewhat controversial figure because I think there's like some, deep political stuff going on here. But I don't really have tons of thoughts about this, really.
No, just that it's going on, and if it impacts it in any way, shape, or form, we'll keep you abreast of it. And to any of the stuff beyond,
I guess it's Julia Koch that's
it's gonna go to the grandkid. It's gonna go to like the family. It's down the line, down the Koch family line, not necessarily to the head Koch, which I think is like 88 years old. So it's an investment from what you can tell in that regards, and we'll see what happens with it. But it doesn't really, I guess the point being, John, it doesn't mean anything at this point. We'll see if it means something at some point. But it didn't mean anything. Does it mean anything that Joe Tsai owns the team? Does it mean anything that anybody owns any team? I mean, realistically, it only matters if the team is good or bad on the court, and if they're willing maybe to spend money. So if you think back to where you and I disagreed on that Joe Tsai, he didn't want to spend money around certain things. We never thought that was the case. But if you're a segment of the fan base that thinks somebody with even more money would be more willing to blast through luxury taxes, then maybe that's the guy for you, to say nothing of his endeavors away from this business potential transaction. Let's get into Jean Ramey. It seems every fourth quarter, the Nets become lazy. The guys aren't moving or rotating enough on offense. I will just say, you walk out of this game where you're like, the Nets got dumpstered. And they lost by 28, so they did get dumpstered. But they also got absolutely like trucked in the fourth quarter. They came out from the second quarter into the third quarter. They went on a 15-2 run. Like, they got back into the game. And the familiar theme to me was, it's like, yeah, but no real adjustments. Shots go in good, shots don't go in bad. And then a total lack of defense or ability to stop Scottie Barnes from getting towards the basket. And that was it. Like, nothing really dramatically changed from the first to second half in this one. And by the fourth quarter, yeah, they all pack it in because they know it's over.
Yeah, they just couldn't stop anyone in transition. They did stop. They got a few stops and steals to start the third quarter, which is what got them back into the game. But ultimately, the offense was still the same problems. They were still, we kind of already covered a lot of this. It was like they were running out lineups that just are going to struggle just on their face to do anything. And that's just going to be a tough hill to climb. I don't even know if it's laziness, really. I mean, by the fourth quarter of this game, I just thought it was kind of mostly over, right? But it was, there was just no adjustments, and there were adjustments. They just didn't make any sense.
That's good from Nader. EGB every game back. See, you don't know what it stood. We didn't know what it stood for. We just know there's a lot of tenets of it, and we want to see how it goes out there. I'll throw this other question. Anybody else at Locked On Nets? I'm not seeing a ton tagged to us, but feel free to hop in. Sometimes it's just good to commiserate. Do you feel like if we watch the next couple of games and it's this type of vibe, that will again go right back to the trade deadline and say, like, Dorian Finney-Smith, what were we not doing here at this point? Even guys like Lonnie Walker. One of the things I will bring up is like Lonnie Walker and Dennis Smith Jr., both on 1-year contracts. And I said it at the time leading up to the deadline, you should maybe make tough choices about those kind of players if teams are willing to offer you something on them. That never really seemed to come up even at a rumor level. But here you are, like the whole point of that was like, clear out some guys so that it makes it easier to put in Jalen Wilson and just play certain players because they're here and available for you.
Yeah, I really think that there's a good chance we look back at this trade deadline, especially with the McHale thing and like maybe some of these other guys, and really think that they blew it. Just like Zach Lowe the other day had it on his podcast that he thinks that the offer from the Rockets about all the picks and swaps back was like real. And when I heard, and that's a real, sourced reporter that doesn't just say that stuff unless he's like pretty solid on it. He's not a Woj guy. Like he's right. Like Zach Lowe. I'm not telling anyone who your Zach Lowe is, but when I heard him say that the other day, in the episode with Bontemps, I was like, my stomach sank because I really think that this is independent of this loss or the Boston loss.
Yeah.
We thought this anyway. I think if that was true, and it really feels like it was, honestly, we're going to look back on that and be like, man, they blew it. They blew it. Like they had a chance to kind of get out of this in a new way and reset and make some, homegrown talent in Brooklyn. And it was going to be a 5-year plan, and you're going to have all your picks plus the Suns picks plus the whatever's left, getting it all back. And yeah, it's going to be bad for a couple years, but have a chance to like really build something. And now it's like so hard to imagine. Like you look at this team and you think, it's like, what's Donovan Mitchell making them? Like,
this has been my pushback, and we talked about this. This was my
and
pushback
he's like the
on
best
that.
player. He's the best player mentioned.
Yeah.
And I would call it 50-50. I wouldn't even say 50%. Like I put it at something like 30% chance he comes here or something like that. That's even too high. It's probably lower. Even if he came for free, like for free, like where you don't give up any picks or anything, which they're not going to do because he's still under contract. Like, how good is the team? And Mitchell's been great, but I just can't, like, are they better than Cleveland is now? No way. Not even close.
Of course not.
Not even close. And so it's just so hard to see it. Maybe Marks and company see it differently and they have a vision and they kind of know things and they've done it before. So it's hard to like totally, hit the eject button here, but man, they just feel so far away from anything positive. And that's such a tough spot to be in.
And I saw some people commenting here, like, you can still turn around this offseason and choose to make that trade with Houston if it's potentially still on the table. And, and you can still shop Mikal Bridges. Like, you can still make that choice. There's just something so.
I mean, are they going to trade it if that's a lottery pick? No. Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, right. Too. It's like, well, not starting this year. Like, not in this year. Now it's in,
like that's gonna be a lottery pick.
Like, you lose one pick.
This is gonna be a lottery pick. I mean, God forbid this thing ends up in like the top 10 or something. But like
you know what? Okay, because because now you're pissing me off. The Houston to not take them back, and again, then also like it's like at that point trading away Royce O'Neal because like, hey, he's a veteran, get whatever you can from him. But you are still battling. Don't end up in a lottery pick situation for Houston to just sit there and enjoy it. That feels the most egregious part of it is that, like, look at your team. You're 21-34. How can you go into that deadline, even if you think like, hey, maybe in the summer we can go get Donovan Mitchell, as you mentioned, then be realistic. What does that mean for this team? A 7th seed? A back end of the playoff team. Okay, great. Winning a first round playoff series, maybe not getting it, but whatever it is. But you're not going to necessarily move the needle to the extent that you want. So then, if you don't think that that's going to be top 4 seed move to go get him, then you come right back to square one. That means that all this is an elongated rebuild process. And what you're saying is like, we're willing to tell you that we have Mikal Bridges and it's all going to mean something. But then every night you go out and you see, in spite of him being talented, in spite of Cam Thomas being talented, getting blown out on the road in Toronto, right? Like, you're still a bad basketball team. It's just so egregious.
Yeah, it's tough. Again, we've said this many times over the years, but these are usually the worst times to evaluate teams, right? Like when you're coming off loss. Now the problem is they lose every game, so like you don't get a chance to not evaluate it in this loss culture because they literally lose every single game, and so they've lost 6 of their last 7, and so it's always tough to do it, but they just keep losing. Now, maybe after this, it's like Minnesota, that's gonna be tough, but then Memphis, they're still without everybody. The Orlando, Atlanta, Memphis, they could, there's still a run to be had here. So it's not white flag time all the way around, but like
those 2 games against the Magic and 2 games against the Hawks. I circled those as saying like, hey, you want to make a run, be in the play-in tournament, circle those 2 games. But so it goes back to, it's hard. You can't look at any team on the schedule and say like, oh, well, they'll win that game.
No, exactly. Well, that's the problem, right? It's like you can't put, because the best way to do it would be the exercise is, where are they going to be favored, right? Like just looking at it now, not going to be favored against Minnesota. At Memphis, they'll probably be favored but it won't be by much, but I'm not even sure about that. Not going to be favored at Orlando. 2 home games against Atlanta. My guess is there's something like -1 for each of those games. But home against Memphis, they'll be favored there. Home against Philly, not going to be favored. Home against away at Detroit, they'll probably be favored by a little. I mean, so maybe I'm talking myself back into it because once I go down this list, I probably are favorites in like more than half these games. I think I'm not positive about that, by the way.
Well, here's the problem is that, and really I think it's that because we said, of the next 10 games, which included the 2 Boston games, we said they can go 6-4. And the idea was they're going to lose those Boston games, but then they'll come out and they'll beat Toronto, lose to Minnesota, but you'll beat Memphis, lose to Orlando, but then the games against Atlanta, Memphis again, right? Detroit, Hornets are down the road there too. Like, the teams are there, but the only way that you instill my mental confidence is by getting one of those wins. Like, go get one of the wins that you think are the chalk ups. And then even this one, if you had lost this game in the last couple of possessions, that would feel different too. It's that you came out first game for Kevin Ollie and it was like, hey, I don't know. I guess maybe, or maybe not. Like it felt so.
That's the word. That's the hardest part, man. That's hardest part is to just to say, new coach, new life, new vibes, and to lose again by like 30 is really troubling. Because usually you can get it going for one game or something, right? Just like go all out, just all the energy, and to lose it like sort of across the board in terms of hustle is actually really disturbing. It's just such a bad sign. I mean, it's
indicative of a collection of players that doesn't want to be here. Like, you know what I mean? That to me is what, like, it's not turning a page, like ramping it back up here. It just feels like it's indicative of like a collection of players that if you went down the list, a lot of them would say, including Mikal Bridges, I wouldn't have hated it if I had found a different home at the deadline.
46-10 in fast break points. 46-10. Like, it just doesn't get worse than that. It's like, it's so bad. 50-40 points in the paint, ton of fouls by Brooklyn. 20 to lost.
How many turnovers they end up with?
20. I was just going to say they lost the turnover battle 20-11, right? Like it's like every single stat. Every single stat's terrible. Like that's really it. Is just you can't look at a single thing. Rotations stink, make no sense. They can't put up 100 points. Whatever. It's just like it's terrible. I don't know.
We're gonna get out the door here because otherwise I think we're gonna start to spiral. But I will just throw this last.
Start the spiral.
Or hit the bottom of the spiral. What comes after the spiral? I feel like I'm in the Westworld. I'm gonna get to the center of that circle at some point.
I'm gonna answer this one. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I put it up here. I knew it was probably gonna fire up Doug. There's a difference. You're gonna answer this, but yes, there are two of the four best players, but not all top four best players on a roster are created the same across the league. The Nets are unique in that way.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The coach that can make it work, good luck. Like the only thing that's ever made this pairing work across multiple coaches, well, I guess Nash wasn't really there, was Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Like those guys were able to make it work because they're generational Hall of Fame scorers that can mitigate two guys that can't really score at all on their own. Outside,
and guess what? Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas had great nights tonight, but they're not those two players. They're not that player that makes it okay. That makes
I just can't. Look, maybe there are schemes that can do it, and like you're gonna have to talk certain players into doing certain things. It's just not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. It's just not a good pairing. It's just not. Like, go look around the league. Go look around the league and tell me how many teams are playing two non-spacers to this level, like to this degree. Two guys that do not take any threes at all, right? And that play together. There aren't any. I mean, the closest is probably, it's not even close because it's probably like Mobley and Allen. And those guys are just like significantly better on defense when you pair them together. And they have like Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and guys like this on the team who are like sort of like elite guards.
And that was going to be the other thing I was going to say was even take the one thing you mentioned, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, take one aspect of their game, passing, like court vision, right? Mikal Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, even Cam Thomas. They're not those guys. Like they're not even in that facet of their game. They're not those players. That actually matters. Ball handling. Mikal Bridges, cannot ball handle like Kyrie Irving. Almost nobody can. Nobody else. Cam Thomas doesn't ball handle like Kyrie Irving. Like
and they still can run pick and roll. Like that team can still run pick and roll with Mitchell and Garland and the other two bigs, and they can kind of get away with it. And those guys are better on defense and aren't like one of them is not required to like have the ball in his hands. So there's just no other examples across the league of two guys on the court for long periods of time who can't space the court at all playing together. And I mean, I guess the only other one, I mean, maybe like Precious Achiuwa and Isaiah Hartenstein, I would like kind of like when they were kind of forced into that situation because Julius Randle was hurt and it was like Randall was hurt and then Mitch Rob got hurt too. Like those guys played a lot of minutes together, but they also had like Jalen Brunson. So I don't know, like there's just, and those guys are probably just better combination defensively because they're so huge and they're good. Like, Hartenstein's a great screen setter. There's the other thing too. Like the Nets have terrible screen setters, just on their team in general. So they can't run a lot of these different actions. It's just the pairing doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Forget it. They just have to get away from it. I think you can play both the guys. You just can't play them as much together. That's all it is.
Hey, we appreciate you guys for coming here after a loss like this and chopping it up with us. Doug mentioned because their next basketball game is Saturday night.
I was trying to look. I was looking at that before. I just had it up in front of me. Hold on one second. I'll get it back.
I think it's Saturday night, and I think it's a slightly late game, which would mean that
it's in Minnesota.
It's a 9 o'clock start, baby. You're not going to see us on a Saturday night special. I hate to break it to you. Unless, the Nets blow them out or something, we'll hop in now. Most likely, so you most likely will not see us on Saturday night for the post game against Minnesota. And then the game after that will be 2 days? So it'll be on Monday night. At the Grizzlies, 8 p.m. tip. We'll be right back in here doing the post game. And we'll have a Monday episode up as well. Maybe taking a look at combinations and rotations. Let's set those lineups for Kevin Ollie so that he can have success and get his first win of the season, if not over the weekend. Get us out of here, Doug.
All right. Thanks so much for everyone jumping in here following another rough game for the Nets, but we're still going to come at you every single day of the weekdays with our Brooklyn Nets talk, and really appreciate everyone that's here. Make sure you go over to We Got Nets and grab that free ebook.
You better believe it, guys. I want hunters. If you hunt, you play. If you don't hunt, you won't play. Nets need 15 new players. Oh my God, it happened too fast. Basketball. Yeah, we'll see you next time.